You think your grandchildren don't visit because they're too busy with their phones and their lives. You're wrong. The real reason they avoid you is because every interaction leaves them feeling criticized, interrogated, and emotionally exhausted. And I'm going to show you exactly how to fix this. But first, you need to understand what's actually happening in their brains when you do the things you think are showing love. I spent 42 years as a clinical psychologist specializing in family dynamics and intergenerational relationships, and I've seen this pattern destroy thousands of families. The grandparents always think they're being loving. The grandchildren always feel suffocated or judged. And here's what nobody tells you. This isn't about generational differences or technology. This is about fundamental psychological mechanisms that you're triggering without realizing it. And once you understand these mechanisms, you can reverse the damage in less than 30 days. When your grandchild walks into your home and you immediately comment on their weight, their hair, their career choices, or their relationship status, something specific happens in their prefrontal cortex. A study from UCLA's neuroscience department in 2019 showed that criticism from family members, especially elders, activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Literally, the anterior cingulate cortex lights up identically whether someone is experiencing a broken bone or harsh judgment from a grandparent. Your grandchild's brain cannot distinguish between these two types of pain. So, when you think you're just making an observation or showing concern, their nervous system is registering a threat. This triggers what's called the autonomic defense response. Their amygdala, the almond-shaped structure deep in their brain responsible for processing threats, immediately floods their system with cortisol and adrenaline. Heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, the hippocampus, which handles memory formation, tags this entire interaction with a negative emotional marker. This is why your grandchildren remember every critical thing you've ever said but seem to forget the good times. It's not intentional, it's neurochemistry. The brain prioritizes threatening memories for survival purposes because remembering sources of pain kept our ancestors alive. Now here's where it gets worse, and this is something I'm going to come back to later with a specific solution. Each time this happens, you're not just creating one bad memory, you're actually rewiring their neural associations with you as a person. The brain uses something called synaptic plasticity, where neurons that fire together wire together. If every visit involves criticism followed by stress hormones, those neurons create a superhighway connecting your face, your voice, your home, and even your name with discomfort and pain. After enough repetitions, just thinking about visiting you triggers anticipatory anxiety. They don't even need to see you anymore for their body to start producing stress hormones. The thought is enough, but you're thinking, I'm just trying to help them. I'm concerned about their future. Here's what you need to understand about how the human brain processes unsolicited advice. When you offer advice that nobody asked for, you're implicitly communicating that you believe the other person is incompetent to handle their own life. This isn't my opinion. Research from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology shows that unsolicited advice consistently reduces the recipient's self-efficacy, which is their belief in their own ability to succeed. Every time you tell your granddaughter she should dress differently or your grandson should switch careers, you're neurologically reinforcing the message that they're failing. The brain's default mode network, which handles self-referential thinking and identity, responds to unsolicited advice by either becoming defensive or by internalizing shame. Neither response makes someone want to spend more time with you. Defense mechanisms activate when the brain perceives a threat to one's self-concept. Your grandchild doesn't hear, "I love you and want the best for you." They hear, "You're not good enough as you are." And the tragedy is, you probably do love them and want the best for them. But love without psychological awareness is like surgery without anesthesia. The intention is good, the execution causes trauma. Let me tell you about the comparison trap, because this is probably the biggest destroyer of grandparent-grandchild relationships. And I'm going to give you a specific script to use instead, but not yet. First, you need to understand the damage. When you compare your grandchildren to their siblings, cousins, or your friends' grandchildren, you activate what psychologists call social comparison theory. Leon Festinger established in 1954 that humans have an innate drive to evaluate themselves by comparison to others, but upward comparisons, where we're compared unfavorably to someone else, consistently produce feelings of inadequacy, envy, and resentment. Your brain releases different neurochemicals during different types of social interactions. Positive, accepting interactions release oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, which creates feelings of trust and connection. Oxytocin actually reduces activity in the amygdala, making people feel safer and more open. But comparison-based criticism does the opposite. It spikes cortisol while simultaneously dropping dopamine levels. creating a state of high stress and low reward. This neurochemical cocktail is the exact opposite of what creates bonding. You're literally chemically preventing attachment from forming. And here's something most grandparents never consider. Your grandchildren are living in a completely different economic and social reality than you did. I'm going to show you exactly how to bridge this gap later. But first, understand the scope of the problem. A study from the Pew Research Center shows that millennials and Gen Z face housing costs that are 39% higher relative to income than baby boomers faced, student debt that's 300% higher, and wage stagnation that's resulted in less purchasing power than their grandparents had at the same age. When you say things like, "When I was your age, I already had a house and 2 kids," you're not motivating them. You're displaying a fundamental ignorance of their reality, and their brain registers this as emotional invalidation. Emotional invalidation is a specific psychological phenomenon where someone's internal experience is rejected, judged, or minimized. When this happens, the brain's insular cortex, which processes interoceptive awareness, essentially your ability to feel and understand your own internal states, becomes dysregulated. People who experience chronic invalidation often develop anxiety, depression, and most relevant to your problem, avoidance behaviors toward the invalidating person. Your grandchildren aren't avoiding you because they're bad people. They're avoiding you because their nervous system has learned that interactions with you destabilize their emotional regulation. Now let's talk about interrogation. You think you're showing interest when you fire questions at your grandchildren. What's happening with work? Are you dating anyone? When are you going to settle down? Why did you choose that career? Have you thought about graduate school? What's happening neurologically is that your grandchild's brain is processing this as an interrogation, not a conversation. The anterior cingulate cortex, which I mentioned earlier, has to work over time to evaluate each question for potential judgment. Each question requires cognitive and emotional labor to determine. Is this a trap? Will my honest answer lead to criticism? What does the person asking really want to hear? This is called cognitive load, and it's exhausting. Research from the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology shows that high-pressure questioning in social contexts increases cortisol, decreases working memory capacity, and creates what psychologists call defensive information processing, where people become more concerned with protecting themselves than with genuine connection. Your rapid-fire questions aren't creating intimacy. They're creating an environment where your grandchild's brain is in constant threat detection mode, trying to navigate a social minefield. But here's what I really want you to understand, and this is crucial to everything I'm going to teach you. Your grandchildren don't owe you a relationship. I know that sounds harsh. I know you changed diapers and attended soccer games and sent birthday money. But attachment research from John Bowlby's foundational work through modern neurobiological studies all point to the same conclusion. Obligation cannot create genuine connection. The brain simply doesn't work that way. You cannot guilt someone into producing oxytocin. You cannot shame someone into feeling warm attachment. Every attempt to leverage obligation activates resentment, not love. The neuroscience here is clear. When someone does something because they feel obligated rather than because they want to, the brain's reward system doesn't activate. No dopamine spike, no oxytocin release. Instead, the interaction is processed through the prefrontal cortex's executive function networks as a task to be completed, not an experience to be enjoyed. This is why visits motivated by guilt are short, superficial, and unsatisfying for everyone involved. The grandchild's brain is literally not capable of generating bonding chemistry during an obligation-based interaction. Now, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do differently, and some of this is going to feel unnatural at first. That's normal. You're going to be retraining neural pathways that have been established for decades. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, continues throughout life, but it requires consistent practice and conscious effort. The good news is that relationships can heal remarkably quickly once you stop triggering the defensive responses I've described. I've seen grandparent-grandchild relationships completely transform in as little as 3 weeks when these principles are applied correctly. First, implement what I call the 24-hour question rule. For the next 30 days, you are not allowed to ask your grandchildren any questions about their personal life, career, relationships, or choices within the first 24 hours of seeing them. None. This feels impossible to most grandparents, but here's why it's essential. You need to break the neural association between your presence and interrogation. Right now, your grandchild's brain has linked seeing you with having to defend their life choices. The hippocampus has stored hundreds of memories where your face immediately preceded uncomfortable questioning. You need to create new memories where your face is associated with comfort and safety instead. What do you talk about instead? This is where most grandparents panic. Talk about yourself, but not in the way you're thinking. Don't talk about your health problems unless they're genuinely serious. Don't talk about other family members' problems. Talk about what you're learning, what you're curious about, what's interesting you. The brain's mirror neuron system, discovered by Giacomo Rizzolatti, shows that we unconsciously mirror the emotional states of people we're with. If you're genuinely curious and engaged with life, those neurons fire in your grandchild's brain too, creating a parallel emotional state. Curiosity is contagious at a neurological level. Complaining is too, so choose wisely. Second, master what I call observation without judgment. This is a skill that requires practice, but it's perhaps the most powerful tool you have. When you notice something about your grandchild, their appearance, their choices, their lifestyle, practice describing it neutrally without any evaluative language. Instead of, "You look tired, are you taking care of yourself?" which contains implicit criticism and triggers defensiveness, try, "I notice you're here," and nothing else, just presence. The brain's ventral vagal complex, part of the parasympathetic nervous system, responds to non-judgmental presence by activating what's called the social engagement system. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, the body interprets safety. This is the neurological state where bonding actually happens. Oxytocin can't be released when cortisol is elevated. You cannot create connection while simultaneously creating stress. Every judgmental comment, no matter how well-intentioned, is biochemically preventing the very outcome you want. Your desire to help is literally sabotaging the relationship at a molecular level. Once you understand this, you start to see your interactions completely differently. Third, and this is the one that will feel most counterintuitive, you need to make yourself slightly less available. Right now, many of you are probably pursuing your grandchildren, calling frequently, suggesting visits, expressing disappointment when they're busy. This pursuit triggers what's called reactance in psychological terms. When people feel their autonomy is being threatened, the brain's motivational systems actively push away from the threat. A meta-analysis published in Psychological Bulletin showed that pressure to engage in a behavior consistently decreases intrinsic motivation to engage in that behavior. Your pursuit is making them want to see you less, not more. Pull back for 2 weeks. No initiated contact unless it's a genuine emergency. This does two things neurologically. First, it removes the pressure that's been activating their reactance. The absence of pressure allows their autonomy motivation to emerge naturally. Second, it creates space for them to actually miss you. The brain's reward prediction error system, which is fundamental to dopamine function, responds most strongly to unexpected rewards and to the anticipation of rewards that aren't guaranteed. When you're constantly available and constantly pursuing, there's no surprise, no anticipation, no reward prediction error. You've made yourself neurochemically boring. When they do reach out during this period, and many will out of curiosity if nothing else, respond warmly but briefly. Don't turn the conversation into an interrogation or a guilt trip about why you haven't heard from them. The brain's associative learning networks need to link reaching out to you with positive reinforcement, not with punishment or discomfort. Every neutral or positive interaction creates a new neural pathway that competes with the old negative associations. But this only works if you're genuinely positive and genuinely brief. Long conversations with undertones of resentment will backfire. Now let's address the gift-giving trap, because this is subtle but powerful. Many grandparents use gifts as a substitute for genuine connection or as a way to maintain obligation. The brain processes different types of gifts very differently. Gifts with strings attached, gifts that come with expectations, or gifts that feel like attempts to control behavior activate the brain's threat detection systems rather than its reward systems. Your grandchild's anterior insula, which processes disgust and aversion, can actually activate in response to a generous gift that feels manipulative. Conversely, small, thoughtful gifts that reflect genuine attention to the person's interests without any expectation of reciprocity activate the brain's reward centers powerfully. A study from the Journal of Consumer Psychology showed that gifts perceived as high in empathic accuracy, meaning they reflect actual knowledge of the recipient's preferences, produce greater bonding than expensive gifts chosen to impress. If your grandchild mentioned 6 months ago that they love a specific type of tea, and you give them that tea with no fanfare and no expectation, you're activating episodic memory retrieval. They remember telling you about the tea. Combined with reward system activation, you cared enough to remember. This combination is neurochemical gold for bonding. Let me give you the script I promised earlier for replacing comparison and criticism. When you notice something about your grandchild that you might normally comment on critically, use this exact framework. I notice your neutral observation, and I'm curious about your experience with that. For example, instead of "you've gained weight, you should exercise more," try "I notice you look different than last time I saw you, and I'm curious how you're feeling these days." The first version triggers shame, cortisol, and avoidance. The second version opens space for them to share if they want to, without pressure or judgment. The phrase "I'm curious" is specifically powerful because it activates openness without demand. The brain responds to curiosity as an invitation rather than an invasion. When someone says they're curious, the social cognition networks in the temporal parietal junction, which handles theory of mind and perspective taking, recognize this as a genuine question rather than a judgment disguised as a question. This subtle linguistic shift can completely change the neurological response to your interaction. Here's what I want you to do this week, and I want you to comment below and let me know where you're watching from and whether you're willing to try this. Choose one grandchild, just one, and send them a message that says only this: "I was thinking about you today and wanted you to know I'm proud of who you're becoming." No need to respond. That's it. No questions, no requests, no guilt. Just a small deposit into the emotional bank account of your relationship. The brain's reward prediction error I mentioned earlier means this unexpected positive message will have an outsized impact precisely because they're not expecting it. What happens neurologically is fascinating. Unexpected positive social feedback activates the ventral striatum, a key component of the brain's reward system, more strongly than expected positive feedback. Your grandchild will likely read that message multiple times. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which handles value and self-relevance, will process it deeply. You're creating a new neural pathway that associates you with positive feelings rather than stress. One message won't fix everything, but it's a start. And the research shows that people are significantly more likely to maintain contact with people who provide unexpected positive regard. Now let's talk about technology and communication methods, because this matters more than you think. The medium shapes the message at a neurological level. Phone calls, especially unexpected ones, require immediate cognitive and emotional resources. Your grandchild might be at work, with friends, or in the middle of something that requires concentration. When a call comes through, their brain has to rapidly switch tasks, process who's calling, predict what the call might be about based on past experience, and decide whether to answer or face guilt about not answering. This is exhausting. Text messages, on the other hand, allow asynchronous communication. The recipient can respond when they have cognitive and emotional resources available. Research on communication modality shows that text-based communication reduces pressure and increases feelings of autonomy, both of which are essential for maintaining positive relationships across generations. If your grandchildren prefer texting, honor that preference. Fighting it communicates that your comfort matters more than theirs, which is exactly the dynamic that's been driving them away. Here's something crucial about apologies that most grandparents get wrong. If you recognize that you've been doing the things I've described, criticism, comparison, interrogation, you might feel compelled to deliver a big apology. Don't. Not yet, anyway. Here's why. Apologies that come with explanations or justifications activate defensiveness rather than healing. The brain's language processing centers in the left hemisphere are remarkably good at detecting authentic accountability versus defensive self-protection. Phrases like, "I'm sorry, but I was just trying to help," or "I'm sorry you felt hurt," aren't actually apologies. They are blame shifting, and the brain knows it. A real apology has three components, and neuroscience research on forgiveness shows that all three are necessary for the brain to process the apology as genuine. First, clear acknowledgement of the specific harm without justification. "I've been criticizing your choices." Second, validation of the impact. "I imagine that's made you want to avoid me." Third, commitment to different behavior. "I'm going to work on respecting your autonomy." Notice there's no explanation about intentions, no request for forgiveness, no minimization of harm. The brain's forgiveness networks, which involve the prefrontal cortex, temporoparietal junction, and limbic system, can only fully activate when all three components are present. But here's the key. The apology must be followed by sustained behavioral change, or you'll create an even worse dynamic. The brain learns through prediction and expectation. If you apologize but then continue the same behaviors, you're teaching the brain that your words are meaningless and unpredictable. Unpredictability in relationships activates chronic stress responses. It's actually worse than consistent negativity because the nervous system can't adapt or prepare. So only apologize once you're genuinely committed to the changes I'm describing. Words without changed behavior are neurologically destructive. Let's address social media, because this is a minefield for grandparent-grandchild relationships. Many of you follow your grandchildren online, and then you comment on their posts critically or publicly share opinions about their lives. This is a profound violation of boundaries at a neurological level. Social media posts, even public ones, create what researchers call context collapse, where multiple audiences with different relationship expectations see the same content simultaneously. When you criticize or interrogate your grandchild in a public forum, you're activating shame networks in the brain that are far more powerful than private criticism. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which processes social pain and rejection, shows dramatically increased activation when social feedback is public rather than private. Public criticism or judgment from family members creates a specific type of humiliation that the brain processes as social threat. If you want to maintain any connection with your grandchildren, never, and I mean never, comment critically on their social media. If you can't scroll past something without judging it, unfollow them. Your need to share your opinion is less important than the relationship. Here's something I see constantly that destroys relationships: grandparents using medical or health advice as a proxy for control. You comment on their diet, their exercise, their sleep, their stress levels, all under the guise of caring about their health. Let me be clear, unless your grandchild asks for health advice, any commentary on their body or health is inappropriate and damaging. The brain processes unwanted commentary about the body through the insular cortex and anterior cingulate cortex in ways that create lasting shame and body image disturbance. This is documented extensively in eating disorder research. Your grandchild is an adult. They have agency over their own body. Every comment you make about their weight, their food choices, their appearance is communicating that you believe they're incapable of managing their own body. The accumulation of these messages can contribute to disordered eating, body dysmorphia, and chronic shame. And before you say, "I'm just concerned about their health," understand that concern communicated through criticism produces the exact opposite of health. Stress from chronic criticism elevates cortisol chronically, which leads to worse health outcomes across every measurable parameter. Your criticism isn't helping. It's literally making them less healthy. Let me give you a specific example of how to transform a typical toxic interaction into a bonding opportunity. Your grandchild tells you they're changing careers, or going back to school, or moving to a new city. Your instinct might be to immediately raise concerns. What about money? What about stability? Have you really thought this through? Every one of those responses triggers defensive processing in their brain. Instead, try this exact script. That sounds like a big decision. What are you most excited about? Notice the shift. You're not asking them to justify or defend. You're inviting them to share the positive aspects of their experience. The brain's language processing and emotional systems are remarkably sensitive to question framing. Questions that begin with why typically activate defensive justification. Questions that begin with what or how typically activate descriptive explanation. And questions that specifically invite sharing positive experiences activate reward and memory systems simultaneously. When your grandchild talks about what excites them about their decision, and you listen without judgment, their brain releases dopamine from the ventral tegmental area while simultaneously encoding this positive interaction with you in the hippocampus. You're creating a neural association between sharing their life with you and feeling good. Active listening is a skill, not just a concept. Most grandparents think they're listening when they're actually just waiting to talk. True active listening involves specific neurological processes. The auditory cortex processes the words. The language centers in the temporal lobe decode meaning. But genuine listening also requires inhibiting your own response preparation networks in the prefrontal cortex. When you're already formulating your response while someone is still talking, you're not actually processing what they're saying deeply. They can sense this, even if subconsciously, and it reduces trust and openness. Practice this. When your grandchild is speaking, focus entirely on understanding their perspective without planning your response. When they finish, pause for 3 seconds before responding. This pause serves multiple functions neurologically. For you, it allows your prefrontal cortex to fully integrate what you've heard before responding. For them, it communicates that you're genuinely considering their words rather than rushing to judgment. Research on conversation dynamics shows that brief pauses before responding increase the perception of empathy and understanding significantly. Here's an uncomfortable truth about the past that you need to hear. Your grandchildren don't want to hear endless stories about how things used to be better. This isn't because they're disrespectful or uninterested in history. It's because the brain's motivational systems are future-oriented, especially in younger people. When you constantly reference the past, especially in comparison to their present, you're activating different neural networks than when you engage with their current reality. Nostalgia activates memory retrieval systems and can create positive feelings for the person remembering, but it does nothing for bonding with someone who doesn't share those memories. If you want to share stories from your past, frame them differently. Instead of, "Back in my day, we didn't need all this therapy nonsense." Try, "I've been thinking about how much I didn't understand about emotions when I was younger." What's been most helpful in how you think about mental health? The first version dismisses their reality and activates defensiveness. The second version shows growth, humility, and genuine curiosity. The brain's social cognition networks respond powerfully to humility and admission of not knowing. It signals safety and openness. Comment below and tell me which of these is hardest for you to imagine implementing. Is it the no questions rule? Is it pulling back on contact? Is it accepting their boundaries around social media? I want to know what feels most challenging, because that's probably where you need to focus first. The resistance you feel is often pointing directly at the behavior that's causing the most damage. Let's talk about expectations and disappointment, because this is often the root of the entire problem. Many of you had a specific vision of what grandparenthood would look like: regular visits, big family dinners, being central to your grandchildren's lives. When reality doesn't match that vision, the brain processes this as loss, and it activates similar neural networks to grief. The anterior cingulate cortex and insula show increased activation during experiences of disappointed expectations. This disappointment often comes out as resentment, guilt-tripping, or passive-aggressive commentary, all of which push your grandchildren further away. You need to grieve the relationship you imagined and accept the relationship that's actually possible. This isn't giving up. This is reality testing, which is a sign of psychological health. The relationship that's possible might be quarterly video calls instead of weekly dinners. It might be text message exchanges instead of phone calls. It might be meeting your grandchildren where they are rather than demanding they come to you. The brain's capacity for satisfaction is entirely dependent on the gap between expectation and reality. Adjust expectations and satisfaction increases, even if circumstances don't change. Here's your action plan for the next 30 days. First, implement the 24-hour question rule with every grandchild. Second, send one message per week to each grandchild that's purely positive with no expectation of response. Third, if you typically initiate contact more than once a week, cut that in half. Fourth, when you do interact, practice observation without judgment for at least the first half of the interaction. Fifth, if you've been guilty of social media boundary violations, either unfollow them or commit to only positive comments. Track how your grandchildren respond over these 30 days. The brain changes rapidly when patterns change. Neuroplasticity means that new neural pathways can form within weeks when behavior is consistent. You're not trying to erase decades of negative patterns overnight. You're trying to create new, positive patterns that can eventually become the dominant pathway. Every positive interaction strengthens the new pathway. Every old pattern interaction strengthens the old pathway. It's that simple neurologically. And if your grandchildren don't respond immediately to your changes, keep going anyway. Their brains need time to trust that the change is real and lasting. The psychological term for this is extinction burst. When you change a long-standing pattern, the other person often initially increases their defensive behavior because they're testing whether the change is genuine. If you revert to old patterns when they don't immediately respond positively, you've confirmed their suspicion that you haven't really changed. Consistency over time is the only thing that rewires relationships. Final truth, some relationships may be too damaged to fully repair. If you've spent decades being critical, controlling, and judgmental, your grandchildren may never want a close relationship with you. That's their right. The brain's self-protection mechanisms exist for good reason, and if someone has decided that a relationship is net negative for their well-being, respecting that boundary is the most loving thing you can do. Not all relationships can or should be salvaged. Sometimes the kindest and most mature response is to work on yourself, apologize for specific harms without expecting forgiveness, and allow your grandchildren the space to live their lives without your involvement. But for many of you, these changes will transform your relationships in ways you can't currently imagine. The brain's capacity for healing and new growth is remarkable throughout the lifespan. Relationships that have been cold for years can warm. Grandchildren who've been distant can become engaged, but only if you're willing to do the uncomfortable work of examining your own behavior, taking accountability without defensiveness, and making sustained changes even when it feels unnatural. That's the work. That's what creates the possibility of real connection. Everything else is just wishful thinking. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.